Is there hope for humanity? At first, this question seems to have an easy answer. Of course, there's hope. Look at how much we've progressed since medieval times, when nearly a third of the European population dropped dead from the Black Plague, and humans had to communicate using physical letters. I will concede that technology has progressed, but when we examine our history and art, as well as some contemporary events, a darker answer begins to emerge. On May 15th, New York City Pride Parade organizers announced that they would be banning law enforcement from marching in the parade and to celebrate the LGBTQ community and the increasing acceptance of previously marginalized sexualities and genders. Though the act was meant to demonstrate the LGBTQ community's solidarity with the movement against police brutality, the parade organizers received much backlash for excluding police officers from what is supposed to be a parade celebrating inclusivity. In a letter to the New York Times in response to the ban, Margaret Hurwitz wrote, "Will this cycle ever end? The oppressed become the oppressors, the marginalized become the marginalizers, the occupied become the occupiers. We see the disastrous effects of this cycle all over the world." The cycle Hurwitz refers to is indeed infinite. Mankind will forever be stuck. Every time we think true peace and equality has been achieved, we'll find there's yet another problem to deal with. We are not perfect, and our human flaws of tribalism, greed, and anger will always find a way to corrupt our society. Thus, there is no hope for humanity. This is not to say there's not a brighter future ahead. Technology has improved our world greatly just in the past few decades. However, we have no hope of true improvement of the human condition. Even with all of our advanced technology, inequality continues to exist. Wars continue to be fought and have killed an unfathomable amount of people, and we all are unable to cooperate with each other, even on the most basic levels. In this video essay, we will explore the destitute and dreary outlook of the human condition through contemporary, historical, literary, and artistic lenses. The malice of mankind has presented itself throughout history. One of the first prominent examples of such can be found nearly 2 millennia ago, within the reign of Julius Caesar. Caesar's rise to emperor of Rome marked a new and prosperous era for the empire. Nevertheless, the roots of the successful emperor are marked with bloodshed. In his time as a leader, Caesar ransacked the towns of his Spanish citizens and started a civil war in fear of his enemies. What is most atrocious, though, is his conquering of Gaul. He would starve his French enemies and cut off their hands as part of his military strategy. This was quite effective in adding Gaul into the Roman Empire, but such cruelty and apathy demonstrates how the sins of one man have hurt many others. Caesar's rule would only be one of the first examples in a long line of such. Progressing through history, the Viking raids between 750 and 1000 AD saw vicious Scandinavian warriors invade mainland Europe's Atlantic coast, as well as Britain and Ireland. The Vikings had no sympathy for the people whose land they invaded, plundering towns, villages, and even monasteries, all while killing inhabitants of the areas. Once again, the savage nature of mankind destroyed lives and created unrest within society. About 200 years after the Vikings, a young man named Temujin successfully united Mongolia and became known as the Universal Leader, or Genghis Khan. Khan would become notorious for his ruthless expansion and conquering. His powerful army would sack peasant farms and kill innocents, all in the name of expanding the empire. At its height, nearly 100 million people lived under the rule of the Mongols, most of whom had been conquered by them. Khan's conquests once again illuminate the cruel and unforgiving nature of man, as well as the intense greed and tribalistic nature of humanity. Khan and his army killed millions of innocents out of the desire for more power and land. They took no care for the governments and peoples in the lands they conquered. You may notice a pattern forming. Humans are desperate for power and will use any means necessary to acquire it. In the 1400s and 1500s, a group of monarchs known as the New Monarchs ruled Western Europe. These monarchs increasingly centralized their power and used Machiavellian techniques to do so. Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain are some of the most notorious new monarchs. This couple began the Reconquista, in which they conquered Muslim lands within the Iberian Peninsula and drove out Moors. and the Spanish Inquisition, in which new Christians or Jews who had chosen not to leave Spain and instead converted to Christianity were tortured due to Ferdinand and Isabella not believing in the strength of their conversion. Millions of religious minorities were tortured or died as a result of Ferdinand and Isabella attempting to grow their power through creating state religion. One of the most heinous acts in history is the colonization and exploitation of Native Americans, especially by the Spanish. In the early 1500s, Spain sent numerous conquistadors to explore Southern and Central America. In less than 50 years, the Aztecs and Incas, two of the largest and most advanced empires in the world, were toppled and their land was taken by greedy Spaniards. On top of this, any indigenous peoples who had not been killed off by the disease the Europeans had brought over were forced to work on encomiendas as slaves. Indigenous peoples were treated as subhumans by the Europeans. They were beaten and physically punished when they acted out or were not able to complete their grueling work, and many died at the hands of the Spanish as a result. Once again, the cruel and power-hungry nature of man shined through. Imperialism in the late 1800s and early 1900s served as a continuation of colonization in some forms. Countries continued to exploit native populations and resources. One notable example of imperialism was Japan. Japan was initially brought under the spirit of U.S. influence. However, in response to U.S. imperialism, Japan began to modernize. Eventually, the country modernized so much that it began to imperialize other countries, such as Korea and parts of northern China. The imperialized became the imperializers. Instead of reflecting on its experience with imperialism and sympathizing with the other East Asian countries, Japan and its government decided to conquer more countries and harm other peoples through imperialism. In more recent years, the Holocaust has been pointed to as an example of the dark nature of man. During World War II, Hitler and his Nazi forces imprisoned and killed millions of Jews and other undesirables in an attempt to purify the German race. Though German citizens knew about the racial cleansing occurring right in front of their eyes, most did not stand up to the Nazi regime and simply watched their Jewish friends and neighbors be marched off to their deaths. The citizens who did not attempt to help or stand up for the Jews were acting out of self-preservation. In order to protect their own lives, they did not do anything to aid the Jews. Such acts by the majority of the German population demonstrate the selfishness and greediness of man. When our own reputation or life is at risk, we shrink away in fear to protect ourselves rather than supporting those who will most certainly lose everything. Finally, the Bosnian genocide of the 1990s exemplifies the cruel and hateful nature of man. During the Bosnian Civil War, Yugoslavs and Bosnian Serbs fought against Bosnians and Croats over the independence of Bosnia from Yugoslavia. Eventually, the Yugoslavs and Bosnian Serbs gained the upper hand and began ethnically cleansing Bosnian Muslims and Croats. This culminated in the Srebrenica massacre of 1995, in which around 8,000 innocent Bosnian Muslims were systematically